I don't know where you are right now. Maybe you just ate yourself silly down in Lockhart, Texas. Or you ate too much Bluebell ice cream up in Brenham. And no, I'm not endorsed by Bluebell ice cream. I love Bluebell ice cream. It is delicious. And I love today's interview. Houstonian Jim Gebhart couldn't sleep, so he decides to start a magazine, ontheflymag.com. It's a pleasure to interview him. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Jim, welcome to our podcast. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for contacting me.
Great. Now, in your most recent issue, I mean, you're the CEO and editor of On the Fly magazine. You had shared an article about fishing for largemouth bass, and our listeners can find that at ontheflymag.com, and there's a link in our on our website, in our blog, that you could find that. But can you just tell us a little bit about that story and what happened with that largemouth bass, Jim?
Well, so, it is literally the story of the one that got away. But what's nice about largemouth bass is that, we fly fishers sometimes focus on, just trout or steelhead or bonefish or rooster fish and, something exotic. But I wrote this article about largemouth bass because it's, as I say in the article, it's kind of every man's fish. Their largemouth bass are distributed across the United States. You don't have to spend a lot of money to go find them and catch them. They're just around. But in the article, I describe how I was out targeting largemouth bass like I do in the spring, and how I was catching a bunch of 3 to 4 pound bass, which are a fun fish on a 5 or 6 weight rod. And I was actually throwing a crystal woolly booger right off this depth change in this small lake, and all of a sudden I hooked something heavy, and I had just caught a bowfin. A lot of people may not know what a bowfin is, but it is a large, almost kind of prehistoric looking fish. And I had just hooked one of those, and it felt real heavy like that. And I thought, gosh, I've caught another bowfin. And this fish just literally went into my backing of my reel very quickly. And I go, man, I got to slow this thing down. So as soon as I put more pressure on it, this big bass came out of the water, and it was, I don't know, 60, 80 feet away. And I could tell even at that point how big it was. I was like, holy smoke, this is the biggest bass I've ever hooked. So there's no way I'm going to lose this bass. So I'm working him back in, and I'm thinking, there's another couple of runs, but got him worked in. And all of a sudden, the line went really tight, and I realized that this bass had wrapped me around something in the water. Huh. So, living in Houston, Texas, one thing you always think about, when I get into lakes, especially when it's warm, is, are there any gators right here?
Sure.
and I fished that lake enough that I knew that there weren't any gators. So I peel line off my reel just so I can reach my kayak. I paddle out there, and I'm preparing to go over and down. I'm going to dive down into this water. It's, probably no more than 8 feet deep, but I couldn't see the bottom. And the wind was blowing. I knew I was going to lose my kayak and have to probably swim across the lake to get it. But I'm determined. So as I slide off the kayak, the tread of my shoe catches my line, and it breaks the line. I'm like, oh man, after all of that. So, but I got to tell you, the joy about catching bass is once you find them, there's probably a lot more to catch on that same day. And I did catch probably 20 bass that day. But literally that would have been my biggest ever on any kind of tackle. Wow. Us fly fish, we usually start off with traditional tackle, but this would have been my largest one on traditional or fly tackle. Huh. So
now my first few years in life, probably my first 10 years, my childhood, I guess you could say, I spent in East Texas, over in Broadus, Texas, St. Augustine, on Lake Sam Rayburn,
Yeah.
and we caught some massive bass growing up out of that lake. There's some big bass. I think in the north we catch the steelhead and the trout and all that, but our bass don't get as big as they do down there. Is that because of the temperature of the water, Jim?
Yeah, I think it's mainly because the length of the season and the temperature of the water and the air.
Hmm.
So, bass will go a little bit more dormant when it gets really cold out. And as you recall, when you lived here in Houston, it doesn't get cold for very long.
Mm-hmm.
And it never gets typically that cold. I think we had like a 3-day winter this year. We had 3 days that were below freezing. And I just happened to be out of town fishing that weekend, and I lost a whole bunch. I was over New Orleans chasing redfish,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't take in any of my plants or protect any, and lost a bunch of trees. Lost my mango tree. Hated that.
Uh-oh.
What
Now,
are you gonna do?
Do you do any saltwater fly fishing down there?
I do, and in fact, a lot of times I'll be asked, "Well, what's your favorite, saltwater fly fishing or freshwater fly fishing?" And you know what, I flip flop back and forth because I love chasing redfish or speckled trout or bonefish, or I've caught blackfin tuna offshore, large king mackerel. I mean, there's just so many species to go after in the salt, and just like once you last summer we did our first hosted trip where I took some folks up to Beaver Creek, Colorado, and when you get in those big browns up there and cutties and such, that's a wonderful experience. And of course, anyone that's ever caught steelhead will never get rid of that addiction.
That's why we go out when our eyes freeze up on our rods. We don't even care. We just go.
Absolutely. As I mentioned to you earlier, I moved to Northeast Ohio to learn to catch steelhead. Is what I wanted to do, and my friends gave me such, because I took my daughter and my son. I think my daughter was maybe 9 or 10, and it had just snowed like 2 feet. I mean, it's just beautiful, but it was a rugged day. It was a typical steelhead fisherman day. So,
right.
We went out there and we had hiked a bunch of distance and found the fish. And my daughter said, "Dad, I'm kind of cold." I go, "Well, do you want to go back to the car?" And she said, "Yes." And I go, "Well, just follow our trail back to the car."
Oh, no.
So she goes back to my car, and another buddy that was out there with us happened to be wandering back by and found her, and turned his truck on and put her in that. And then he came to me and said, "What kind of father are you?" I said, "I'm a steelhead fisherman." So anyway, she has survived, and she writes for the magazine now, and is an active bird hunter and fly fisher.
Wow, yeah, there's some great bird hunting down by where you are too. It's kind of world renowned, isn't it?
Oh my gosh, it's they say that in Colorado County, Texas, that more ducks are killed in that county than any other county in the United States. And of course, I have a duck lease over there, so it is a pretty good place to hunt. It's only about an hour and a half from the house, and I think I shot 65 ducks there last year.
Wow. Do you use a dog or not?
I have children. I don't have a dog. And although my friends have dogs, but the dog is a little more efficient than the children
A little more obedient as well.
Absolutely. Those dogs complain a whole lot less. But my daughter, who's 16, she's a good sport and loves to go hunting, and my 27-year-old son is an avid bird hunter also. So it's good, whether it's ducks or quail or pheasant or dove. We have a good time with it.
Well, that's great. Now, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into fly fishing, Jim?
Yeah, I started, I guess, the first time I went fly fishing was probably in seventh or eighth grade. And one of my good friend's brother was an avid fly fisherman. His name was Elliot Jennings, brother of my friend Dale. And as I recall, we we were going to my parents' cabin in Kentucky, and we just took a bunch of his fly gear with us. And I had learned to fly fish by reading McLean's Fishing Encyclopedia that was probably published in, I don't know, 1965 or something.
Wow.
And, I read about it. That was back before YouTube videos and everything else. Now you can find out all kinds of instruction. And, so that was the first time, and we had figured it out and caught a bunch of crappie and white bass. And then I kind of set it aside for a few years and took it back up again when my son was pretty young, and we started traveling around. And now that we have the magazine going on, my son or daughter, they're always arguing who's going to go on a trip with me to review a bonefish lodge or someone's outfitting organization, and they both look a lot better than I do fly fishing. So they go as my camera people, but they're younger and better looking, so they get a lot more exposure in the magazine than pictures of me. So.
That's great. Yeah, that's hilarious. Well, let me ask you this question. What prompted you to start this magazine? I mean, a lot of people all fly fish or they're weekend warriors. What was it? Was it something in your career, or what was it that it said, you know what, Jim, you need to take this up a notch? What was it that inspired you to do that?
Well, I've always enjoyed writing and obviously fly fishing and photography. And at one point, when I was in between jobs, I had started a film production company, and my wife was getting concerned. Should you be doing something where you make money? so she was right. I hate it when she's right, but she usually is. And anyways, and once I got a job again, it's kind of a stressful job that I have. I manage medical laboratories for clinical and pathology testing, and have a lot of employees, and I actually love that job, but it can be stressful. So I was having problems sleeping at night, worrying about everything you worry about when you're running business. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to think, gosh, what can I do in these hours when I'm walking around like Dracula in the house? And then I just came up with the idea of, you know what, I'm gonna start a magazine. And I went through GoDaddy at the time and found a URL that was available that was actually ontheflymag.com, and I bought that and bought software to build a website that I could host the magazines on. And I knew that I've been fly fishing and bird hunting so much in my life that I have a lot of stories that I've when my father first ran around with me and dragged me around fishing to the trip I did last weekend, kind of thing. And then I began reaching out to folks, through LinkedIn and other ways, and to find people that would like to contribute. And the next thing you know, I've had 13 issues out there. We just released our 13th issue this spring, and have some great photographers and writers and artists that contribute to the magazine. And I got to tell you, it's one of the most fun things I do in my life.
Wow. That's great. Well, kudos to you for doing that, for stepping out. It's a good quality. When I read it this afternoon, it's good stuff. And you can tell that there's a passion behind it. And, you had mentioned there you were having trouble sleeping at night. Are you sleeping better now that you launched the magazine?
I actually am. And frankly, I had to kind of wake up a little bit for our discussion tonight because, it's not like it's like I don't have enough to do, but I started this gladiator workout program this morning where I get together with all these other boneheads at 5:15 in the morning, and it's pretty tough. But when I work out like that, I sleep well at night. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of between issues right now, so I don't have a lot of things that I have to be doing other than contacting folks that should be sending articles to me. But
you talked about how you use this magazine, and fly fishing's meant a lot to you as far as getting some sleep and just dealing with the stress of your job. Now, you are also involved with another organization called Real Recovery. And that's one of the main reasons I reached out to you when I saw that you volunteer for that. Can you just explain to us what that is and what your involvement looks like?
Absolutely. So Real Recovery is an organization that started back in 2003 when the founders actually had a friend that was dying of cancer, and they said, "Hey, let's all go fly fishing and take our friend fly fishing." And they did, and it meant so much to that person that Real Recovery was started to help other men that are dealing with cancer, wherever they are in that march through the disease, to help them get away and experience something else other than worrying about their disease. So these retreats that we invite men on, all expenses paid, food, learn to fly fish. We provide the tackle. We have courageous conversations where the men talk about things that they typically probably wouldn't talk to other men about that they don't know. Men arrive as strangers, and how we tend to not really want to talk about our feelings and such. But these courageous conversations are led by a psychologist. And these men really open up. And although they arrive as strangers, they leave as very good friends, typically. And they stay in contact. And we put them on fish and teach them to fly fish. And we have a vest signing ceremony where other participants have signed the vests and then pass it on to the next group where they sign it and date it. And it's a pretty emotional thing. I mean, a lot of, some of the folks, not a lot, but some of the folks, that have signed those vests are no longer with us. And it's something that I really throw my support behind with the magazine and as a co-coordinator of the retreats. Hmm. So here in Houston, the main guy is Dave Stefik, and he is so involved and so passionate about it that he's just a pleasure to work with.
Yeah, no, I mean, when you open up On the Fly mag, your magazine, the most recent one's the only one I read, but that front page, it says Real Recovery on it, that first big page. So I can tell that it's a passion of yours. What do you see? What happens to these guys when they're out there? I mean, they're going through a very unique period in life that few of us will experience. And what do you see? How do they respond to fly fishing?
Well, I can tell you at first they're a little bit nervous about I don't really know how to cast, and but then when you teach them a basic up and down cast, and they cast out there and they catch fish, and they're assigned a fishing buddy with them that is there for advice and should they need any kind of assistance of anything, a chair or sunscreen or whatever, or a drink, and you can really see these gentlemen just relax and open up and laugh and just tease other guys. You know how we like to give each other a little bit of grief. They're out there just having a blast. And the fishing buddies that volunteer and support the the retreats as long as as well as the more staff-like guys, such as Mike Emerson, who's the state leader for Texas with Real Recovery. I mean, it's truly a very rewarding thing, not only for the men that are involved, but for those of us that volunteer. It's a lot of work, but once it all comes together, you go, wow, that was another great retreat.
Wow.
So it's a good thing. So, we're always looking for participants. I'd mentioned this to you earlier. So, I mean, if you know of men that are marching through that, disease, regardless of where they are in that, they may have recovered, they may be dealing with it as a new disease, please let them know about Real Recovery, and whether they know how to fly fish or don't know how to fly fish, I've never seen anyone kind of disgruntled with the time they spend with Real Recovery.
Wow.
So
that's fantastic. We'll put a link up on our website. And you guys are a 501c3, is that correct?
That is correct. It is entirely a nonprofit volunteer program. And there are very few employees, but it's an organization where where the money goes towards the participants and the retreats, and it's not squandered on other things like, I don't know, maybe we could spend a little bit more on advertising. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm not at that grade, so I don't make those decisions.
Okay. Well, do you guys have one in each state? You had mentioned you had someone that's head of. Do you have somebody in each state that's over that, or?
So we are not in every state in the United States. We have some Northeast chapters, of course, the chapters in Colorado. There's some on the West Coast. There's a active chapter in Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas, and I'm sorry, I'm embarrassed that I can't tell you where else we are, but I can tell you that it all of a sudden a Real Recovery popped up in New Zealand also.
Oh, wow.
So we're truly an international organization now, besides in the multiple states that we're in here in the U.S.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. And when I saw, my buddy sent me that article on Real Recovery right 2 or 3 months ago, and when I read it, I'm like, I've got to speak to somebody, because that's exactly what we here at this podcast is all about, is just coping with difficult situations with fly fishing, and just kudos to that organization. So if our listeners would like to know more about Real Recovery, you can check out our website at remotenopressure.com. Check out our blog. We're going to have links to Jim's magazine on the mag. It's on theflymag.com. And then also, right. What's Real Recovery's website?
It is Real Recovery, and it's spelled REEL, recovery.org.
Okay.
O-R-G.
Now, before we get going, you had mentioned fly fishing for carp. Can you just tell us what you set up, like what size rod, reel, and then also what kind of flies you're using to catch carp?
Well, so believe it or not, carp can be pretty finicky eaters. And, when I'm fly fishing for them, I got to tell you, there's people that use 8-weight rods, but I would guess that the majority of the rods that people use are in the 5 or 6 weight. I have a 6-piece 6 weight that I absolutely love, and I use that all the time. But there's a variety of flies to be used. But I find that one of the best flies, gosh, what is it called? We're actually tying them on Wednesday night this week down at Bayou City Angler, and it's called a brass hawk, BRASSHAWK, and it's kind of it looks sort of, believe it or not, kind of like I don't know, like an ugly, crazy Charlie kind of looking fly.
Uh-huh.
And I say that because Crazy Charlie is such a good fly for me. I've got steelhead on it. I've caught carp on it, caught lots of bass on it, and bonefish too, of course. But it's just kind of a model fly that I have found very successful. But there's a lot better carp fishermen, more experienced carp fishermen than I am, such as Danny Scarborough, who started this Holy Carp tournament. And so if you get an opportunity, I mean, up there, so you're up in the Great Lakes area, there's tremendous carp fishing in the Great Lakes on some of those flats up there.
Oh yeah. And I've never chased them down. My buddy fishes for them with a bow, but
yeah,
I've never went out. And when you say they're like a redneck bonefish, that makes me curious. I fit both a redneck and I would like to catch some bonefish. So that would definitely appease my appetite. That's for sure. So I have to chase those down. I'll probably just grab my my steelhead rod, and go out with that.
You are looking for typically tailing carp, essentially. You see them in the shadows feeding, and you cast to them like you would sight casting to any fish. They're, we fish for them in creeks, rivers, ponds. It's my experience. You cast where they're going to be, not for where they are, because they can be sometimes scared also. You put a fly right on top of them, you're going to run them off, just like most fish. But you get it out there where it's not a real loud plop, because sometimes the plop makes them curious enough to come over and check it out. Or if you're in good clear water and you're moving that fly along the bottom where they can see it, I mean, they jump on it sometimes. Other times you cast 15 times until you scare the fish away, just like everything else we try. Just like those trout or those steelhead or bonefish or bass or anything else. We scare some away, we catch some.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Well, Jim, thank you very much for spending some time with us. I really appreciate your graciousness. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you also. I would like to put in a plug for Casting for Recovery also. It's kind of a equivalent for ladies that are battling breast cancer. And those are the Casting for Recovery and Real Recovery are two organizations that On the Fly magazine believes and supports.
Well, thanks, Jim. And thank you for joining us today on the Remote No Pressure podcast. Why the crazy music? I'm so glad you asked. It's all about our next guest, A.D. Maddox. She's going to tell us her story about how she didn't find fly fishing, but fly fishing found her. Till next time, Sightlines.